So I am Dr. Lindsay Glass Campbell. I'm with the Coastal Fisheries Division at Texas Parks and Wildlife. And tonight I will be giving you information on proposed grow out sites G-0023 through G-0051. Now, this does not mean that our presentation will be extra long, as we're presenting these together because it's a group of individuals that are coming together as a cooperative, and the sites are located adjacent to each other. So in essence, they make up a larger site. So we're going to present them all together. So the purpose of this public hearing is to provide information on the proposed cultivated oyster mariculture grow-out sites in Matagorda Bay system, and answer questions on the proposed sites and give instructions on how to submit public comment. A brief background on oyster mariculture in Texas. TPWD permits the activity of cultivated oyster mariculture at grow-out sites, often called farms, and nursery hatchery facilities. All oyster aquaculture in Texas is off-bottom. Applicants nominate their own sites and conduct a natural resource survey to ensure that other natural resources are not going to be impacted by these sites. Each permit, it has a 10-year term, and only the eastern oyster from Texas broodstock are allowed. A few types of common gear you may see in oyster mariculture sites are floating bags here on the screen, and when it's bagged, it's a rigid mesh. I have a polymer plastic like mesh, creating more of an envelope to hold those oysters in, and then there's floats on them. So the oysters, and between this gear and other gears, you will often hear me talk about desiccation or feeding position. So feeding position is when the oysters themselves are in the water so they can filter and feed. Desiccations are when the oysters and their cages are up out of the water, and that helps reduce fouling and other organisms that may, like little crabs that may have been in those cages, will drop out during that desiccation process. So you have floating bags, and then kind of step up from that size-wise are floating cages. So you'll have a larger metal structure that then holds bags, individual bags, and then larger floats on those cages. These are all attached to a main line that is anchored to the bay bottom. Another system is called the adjustable long line system. This is whereby there's posts, and the posts have clips or some other way to hold a line at 3 different positions. So your feeding position, oysters right there on the top of the water column, and they would be in, they call these floating baskets, and the baskets are attached to that line, and then the farmers can move that line up on those post clip out of the water desiccating, and if need be for things in Texas like storms, those can be lowered down closer to the bottom. Annual fee for these permits are paid based on the size of the sites. Before the activity may begin, other authorizations are needed, such as from the Texas General Land Office, Texas Environmental Quality, Army Corps of Engineers, which heads up the federal review of a project, and marking designation and private aids to navigation from the U.S. Coast Guard. We do have an active use criteria whereby 100,000 oyster seed per acre per year must be stocked, and year-round harvest is allowed, however, must comply with the Texas Department of State Health Services regulations. And a little bit on those regulations, Department of State Health Service, Texas Department of State Health Services classifies waters for oyster harvest. Now they classify waters for a variety of reasons, but in specific to this, to the oyster mariculture, they classify waters for oyster harvest. This classification is just for oyster harvest. It doesn't have an effect on any other type of activities that would occur in those waters. The TPWD is not involved in those classifications. For more information, you can visit the Department of State Health Services website, and specifically their Seafood and Aquatic Life group. So tonight, our proposed sites, they are grow-out sites, so oysters are grown from a smaller size to a harvestable size. They are all grouped together, hence why we're presenting those together, and I'll show you a diagram here quick in a few minutes. They are located in Keller Bay, which is a sub-bay of the Matagorda Bay system, which is shellfish harvest area TX18, so these are approved waters. Each site individually is 2 to 4 acres with a total 60 acres for all the sites together. Our vicinity maps, so we're over here in Calhoun County in Matagorda Bay. And then from there in Keller Bay, we have the sites outlined in this red square. See this small orange square? That is a conditionally approved grow-out site G-0021 in the area. Zooming in a bit more, so you see G-0021 over here, and then a group of sites inside of Keller Bay. This cooperative, the group of individuals coming together for this, they have formed the Matagorda Bay Fishing Cooperative. So they are working together with their sites. Now, each site, again, they'll have their individual permit and must individually comply with all those regulations, but the group has come together to work together, be near each other, and then for the further processing, have a processing house, have people helping organize all the paperwork and submitting all of those. And each individual site, you will see the individual permit numbers here. And as we go next through their operations plan, the cooperative got together, they spoke and decided how they were all going to operate their layout and agreed on all those. So that's another reason we're presenting these together, as they have all the same operation plan except for their coordinates. Route map would be leaving from Olivia Boat Ramp and driving south or boating south on Keller Bay to their sites. I do want to note, aside, separate from this project, that the county has received one grant to help renovate the Olivia Boat Ramp and other grants for several boat ramps within that county, but in specific, there's grant money and plan for renovation on the Olivia Boat Ramp, and the county is also actively pursuing other grants to help bolster that renovation of that boat ramp. So the gear they proposed: floating cages. They are going to have nylon rope or lines for their main line and bridle lines. They'll be anchored. Here's an example of augers with a 7-inch helix on those. They'll have buoys on each anchor point. We'll show an overhead sight right after this and cross sight. So each main line has an anchor on either end, so there'll be buoys on either end. And each farm will have 2 columns with 10 to 13 rows of cages per column, and within those rows or per main line, 10 to 15 cages. Navigational markings will be per the U.S. Coast Guard requirements, with corner markers, pylons, and or a mix of those lighted 3-foot buoys and proper signage. If the site attracts excess birds, bird deterrents will be flags on the corner markers. hawk or owl predator decoys, not the kite type, but a smaller stationary decoy type. And there's a picture here of what they call zip tie ticklers. So zip ties around the floats sticking out to help discourage birds from wanting to land on those. So again, these site plans are for each individual site, but it will be uniform throughout all these sites as the same layout. So in a 2-acre plot, you have these 2 columns, and then the individual rows within the columns, zooming in a little bit more on those. In between each main line, 20-foot spacing. In between the 2 columns, a 45-foot spacing. And then each cage will be about 5 to 6 feet apart. And a side view here is you have your main line with there's slack for adjustment for storm surge and other things. And then the cages are attached by bridle ropes or lateral lines to that main line. And again, anchors on either end with buoys above each anchor. Access will be via boat and will be worked via boat daily, weather permitting. Cage system will be flipped for desiccation and then resubmerged prior to harvest as per FDA and health and safety requirements. Oysters will be tumbled and sorted as needed on vessels within the sites, and any gear requiring cleaning will be taken to land at a land-based site for that cleaning. All gear will have, as required by all of our mariculture sites, identification tags with contact information. And again, as part of those operations plan that all of our sites have to submit, they have to have a plan for all non-organic waste. It will be collected and disposed of on land. For the hurricane plan, before and during season, gear will be checked constantly for wear and tear and any sort of strain. If a site is within the cone of uncertainty 32 hours before landfall, the cages will be sunk. And then post-storm, they will be refloating cages, checking lines, checking oysters, assessing the damage, and reporting any damage or lost gear as needed. The natural resource survey for this, the natural resource survey was done for the whole 60-acre area. So while this may look like one plot, it is actually the whole 60-acre area. They did a side scan to supplement sediment grabs. And so the side scan here did not indicate any hard bottoms or any other substrate type that we required any further investigation on. And here's the plan for all those sediment samples for the site. So within the site at that higher density, and then at the 200-foot buffer. So side scan and sediment samples were collected in November. A total of 784 sediment samples were collected for within the sites and that 200-foot buffer around. Depth range between 5 and just over 5 feet and just under 6 feet throughout the site. Sample composition was mud, sand, silt, mud, fine sand, and there was no evidence of oyster habitat or seagrass. And this is a series of pictures showing how those samples were collected. It was modified post hole digger with extra long handles, arms that would go down. They would grab the sample and then bring it on board, put it over on a board. Again, we have pictures of all those samples and the site numbers. So the next steps for these proposed sites, public comment is open to October the 14th, and you may submit your public comment to oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. After that public comment period, if any public comment needs to be addressed, that will be addressed. If we need to alter plans or anything for those public comment, then a conditional permit is issued. Oyster mariculture activity cannot begin yet when they have that conditional permit, but that conditional permit is then taken to those other agencies to show, hey, TPWD has approved of this, and they must also secure those other agency authorizations, be those permits, leases, designations, and such. Once those are all collected, they will come back to TPWD. We review, make sure all those documents are in order. And then once the first year's annual fee is paid, that final permit is issued and mariculture activity can begin. So now we have, we'll leave it open for any questions, and you use the Q&A feature to ask questions on the screen or type questions, but the Q&A feature should be on the lower portion of your screen. And we'll go ahead and just give it a minute or two for anybody who is typing questions. Okay, we did have one question about the difference between the 2-acre and 4-acre plots. Let me get back to our map here. And while most of these are 2-acre plots, and that's how they were divided up, one individual wanted to have 2 plots next to each other. So instead of that one individual having 2 different permits, that will just be completed in a 1 permit for 4 acres. We have another question about a reservoir being built in Lavaca River. I will see Karen or Leslie.
There is a reservoir planned on Lavaca, and it is an off-river storage. And yes, it is planned and in the works.
Okay.
Is there more to that question?
It's just about reservoir being planned and effects on Keller Bay.
Yes, there will be effects similar to a drought year in terms of the reservoir is planning to scalp high flow events such as a tropical storm. But estuaries are flexible. We'll have to see the long-term impacts. It is likely we could see some increase in salinity, but it's still able to sustain the oysters. At this moment in time, nothing else changing.
We have another question about who is the taxing authority of this location. It's a little bit outside of necessarily the mariculture here. This is, part of Calhoun County, and as the individuals and the co-op conducts their business, they are subject to any sort of county or local taxation, but that's not something that TPWD has control over or is a part of. And I think, so there's some more questions about the reservoir in the area. That's purpose of this public meeting is to answer about these mariculture sites. I will defer that if you have further questions about reservoirs and potential effects in the area, to contact our local ecosystem team in the Matagorda Bay ecosystem, and their office is located in Palacios. Okay, our question is, who gives permission to build mariculture sites? So that is a joint effort. Again, TPWD permits the activity, but the applicants must also get a surface lease from coastal surface lease from Texas General Land Grant Office, because while their gear is floating, it must be anchored to the bottom. And so that's Aldering Bay bottom. So they must get that surface lease from General Land Office. They must have a wastewater discharge permit from TCEQ. Now, they are not really discharging water. The water is just flowing through their cages, but the way mariculture and aquaculture and things are governed, it's falls under that. It's a special category for mariculture structures of this type, of these grow up type. So again, they're not discharging or taking up any water under the grow out. It's just the water is flowing through the cages, the oysters filter the water, and the water flows back out. Also, they must have a review, a federal review. So that's coordinated through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that, like TPWD, also looks at their plans for building, types of line, types of gear, aggregate impacts on sites, other historical sites. So they coordinate that review, that federal review, same things that TPWD looks for, but also allows the federal agencies to look into that. And then because these sites are out in the water, they must get this marking designation by the U.S. Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard, again, looks at the site plans, sees where they are, sees the type of gear, how much, and determines the types of navigational beacons and markers need to be there to help avoid, so vessels can know that the navigation there and reduce any types of collision. And then after that marking designation is issued, they get what we call a patent, or a private aids to navigation. So its certificate registers the lat and long of those sites. They do that, they put those in, and then all of those, once that's registered, the Coast Guard distributes with their charts and to NOAA, that those will then show up on charts. So again, it's a team effort of all of our agencies do that. And then once they have the activity, TPWD is involved with, they must submit monthly reports, they must do inspections, annual reports, stocking reports, harvest reports, all of those things. So yes, the TPWD, when these sites, the question is, so this is permitted with the General Land Office. What department is in charge of this? And are all mariculture sites under the GLO? So it's mariculture sites are under both the GLO and TPWD. So within the General Land Office, they must get that coastal surface lease at the General Land Office. The point of contact for the General Land Office, specifically over mariculture, is Danielle DeVock with the General Land Office, and that's DEVACQUE, Danielle DeVock with the General Land Office. She heads up over the service leases for mariculture sites. And then TPWD, again, is in charge of the activity. So the gear in the water, making sure they're in compliance with the when they're on the water, with health and safety. And once they get off the water, also there's health and safety with the Department of Health, any kind of food product going into the market. So I would say in general, the mariculture sites mainly the activity and not day-to-day activities are under TPWD and what they're doing there, but they must also have these other authorizations, and there's authority within those other authorizations over certain aspects. Okay, getting a lot of great questions tonight. I'm gonna put back up a slide real quickly, the end slide that has information about where you can, that oyster mariculture, TPWD, TPWD, I'm sorry, oyster.mariculture@cpwd.texas.gov is where you can, again, submit your public comment, or if you have any questions, further questions about about this site or other sites, contact us there. And also there is a link to the TPWD Oyster Mariculture site. It's a really long address, so we shorten it down to that bit.ly link there where you can find more information. And final question, the repeat funding for this project. This project is funded, this is a business, so each of these individuals must fund their own sites. They may have worked with other, may have received business loans or grants. So TPWD does not fund this project. I did mention that Calhoun County had let me know that among several of boat ramp sites that they have received funding to redo the Olivia boat ramp that will be predominantly used here has funding. But again, that's a funding through Calhoun County, and they have a variety of sources that they use for that funding. I don't know the specifics on those, but the sites themselves are funded by the individual permit holders. And again, I don't know, or don't have the ability to disclose, or nor do we ask them how they are funding their own sites. That's a business decision up to them. Okay, we've had a lot of great questions here tonight. And again, if you have further questions after, feel free to email us, check out our website, and I will hand this over. Oh, before I hand it over, one last question. What happens to the shells? Well, when the oysters are taken to market and wherever the oysters are eaten, there are many cities and restaurants that involved in programs such as Sink Your Shucks, which recycle those shells after they've been treated and disinfected, can be recycled back to help rebuild reefs. So there's various programs on that, but ultimately the shells, what happens to those depends on the end user and consumer at restaurants or at someone's house. And why are shells not returned to the water directly? Well, these farmers are raising their oysters here as a consumer product, a food product. So once they sell their product, they don't have control over how or where those shells are returned. But now when someone is eating oyster, and programs like Sink Your Shucks or other oyster shell recycling programs, those shells eventually are returned to the water. They just go through a process where they sit out, they are clean, so there's no longer any leftover oyster tissue or cooking residue or anything on those. So they sit out, they get cleaned, they kind of bake in the sun, they get cleaned, they get disinfected prior to going back into the water, which we would definitely recommend, especially if you are getting any oyster, even if it is an Eastern oyster, if it is not directly from that water. Make sure those shells are cleaned and disinfected before they go back into the water, because they could carry bacteria, diseases, viruses from both oysters and humans, or just any kind of residue from cooking. We don't want to add those extra nutrients to the water. So shells can go back, but we just want to make sure those are cleaned up and in the best available condition they can be before they help surfaces to build those reefs. I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Holly, to do some wrapping up here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Lindsay. So like Lindsay said, please submit your public comment to our Oyster Mariculture email address that will be sent to you in a follow-up email from Zoom tomorrow, along with a link to our YouTube channel where this recording will be posted. Give us about a day to get it uploaded. And there will also be a link to our Oyster Mariculture website where you can learn more about the Oyster Mariculture program. And of course, if you have any additional questions about the program, please feel free to also email those to our Oyster Mariculture email address. We thank you all for joining us this evening, and we will see everyone next time. Thanks, everyone.